hope you all know that nobody, does anyone enter a marriage wanting to get divorced at some point in the future? Let's hope that nobody does that. Okay, so there you go. And wouldn't those people be trying to keep that marriage together the entire time? You would hope so. And still they fail. Well, there you go. There's a lesson in the futility of expecting politics to ever make anything really better. You know, maybe you should look closer to religion if you're looking for answers, because you're not going to find any answers in politics, just problems. Okay, there was a lesson for you.
I didn't get on camera.
Carrie?
Here.
Ruhi?
Here.
Eric? Christopher?
Here.
Courtney?
Here.
Natalie? Jinda? Madeline?
Here.
Aaron? Jonathan? We don't have a good turnout today. Charles is here. Adam? Don't have a good turnout today. Oh well. Michael?
Here.
Ian?
Here.
Cindy?
Here.
So did anybody watch the show I recommended?
The Tower.
Prep?
I haven't downloaded an episode. I haven't.
Oh, one person is TiVoed the episode. There's like a half an answer. Joseph?
Here.
Got a half vote. Corey?
Here.
Mr. Kim?
Here.
Sam?
Here.
Paul?
Here.
Daniel?
Here.
Thomas?
Here.
Stephen? Sandra?
Here.
Virginia? No, I'm sorry. These are people who haven't been in class. Shalina?
Here.
Matthew? Roxanne?
Here.
Joe?
Here.
Ms. Scott?
Here.
Jeremy?
Here.
Nicholas? Vivian?
Here.
Jessica? Anyone else? Okay. All right, now. Okay.
No.
Huh? Oh, you know what I really want to do is change the lighting in here. I got one of these charts that's got a lot of information on it. That's really quite valuable, really. And, oh, I should bring the map down. Then it'll even. Okay. No. There, okay, all right. Okay. Just get all sorts of let's make it as big as possible. Got a lot of glare. Got a lot of glare there, don't we? It's from that one. That's got to go. That one's got to turn off. There we go. Yeah, that improved things considerably. And so, big as possible, and then I'll put my glasses on. If you can believe it, I can't read it. I can't read it from there without my glasses on. Now I can read it. Good. All right. So, we've got the irrepressible conflict. Oh, really? There. Obviously, you can even... So, there we are. At by the way, no test questions on the Wilmot Proviso. It took an awful long time for me to realize that the Wilmot Proviso was not passed. So that breaks my rule of not talking about things that weren't passed by the Congress. Well, the Compromise of 1850 was passed by the Congress. And that's the next topic that we're covering. And about to see that I'm going to be saying things almost exactly as that said it, but in completely different order. So, it's just two different people talking about the same stuff. Is what we've got going on here. Yes. And I'll need this map in a moment, too. All right. So, the compromise in 1850, the Civil War almost broke out over the question of the extension of slavery in the territories. Should California be admitted to the Union as a free state or a slave state? Okay, so as a result of the gold rush of 1848, out of the blue, California went from having a few hundred American settlers to 10 times as many as necessary to become a state. And California, by 1850, is more than ready to become a state in the Union and wants to become a state in the Union. But there is a massive problem. California's geography, the geography of California, is ruining the Missouri Compromise line. The Missouri Compromise line. Southern border of Missouri across here. North of this line is to be free states. South of this line is to be slave states. Bisects California. You can't have half California's counties having slavery legal and the other half of the counties slavery is illegal. So one way or another, California's geography, being a north-south state, has ruined the Missouri Compromise line. It worked for 30 years. Now it doesn't work anymore. Now, there were still a small number of politicians in the North and the South who were willing to work for compromise to keep the country together, to avoid a civil war. But the compromise that was being worked out was going to fail because the leaders in Washington had personal disagreements with each other. The word I was looking for in the shower this morning, animosity. Personal animosities often are behind political decisions. But politicians always deny it in public. Because if you admit that you voted against something because you don't like the guy who proposed it, you will look like a bad man. So you always deny it, even though it always happens. You better believe that powerful people who get in each other's faces and end up not liking each other, remember that, and years later they will take that out on you by voting against your pleasant proposal that they actually might even think is a good idea, but you're the person who introduced it, so no. Animosity is real, and you should look out for it in politics, because you have to be able to smell it. You'll never admit it. In today's America, animosity has basically ruined all ability of Democrats and Republicans to work together. They've come to hate each other in a way that they didn't in the past. President Zachary Taylor is a Whig, and so is the Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, but Henry Clay thinks he should have been president. He's the leader of the Whigs. All the Whigs' ideas are his, but every time a Whig gets elected president, it's some stupid general. Meanwhile, the leader of the Senate is Daniel Webster, a Democrat, who doesn't want to cooperate with the Whigs. So these three men, being unable to cooperate with each other, brought the country to the verge of war, because the South is demanding that California be admitted to the Union as a slave state, even though not a single human being owns a slave in California. Nor does anyone want anyone to. California is full of prospectors who are trying to strike it rich with gold. You better believe no one wants to show up. How could you compete with some guy who showed up with 1,000 slaves to work in the mines for free because they're slaves? Could you compete if you had to pay miners to work in your mine? No. So nobody wants slavery in California. Nobody owns any slaves either. But once again, this is a point of honor for the South. It will be humiliating if we lose this vote in Congress. Okay, California must be admitted. All new states should be slave states. Why the free states should be slave states, they would say. All right, so what happened is that there were some people died. People died and things changed. President Zachary Taylor dies of natural causes in 1850. And Henry Clay, who was extremely old, Zachary Taylor and Henry Clay were both in their 70s by this time, or almost 70. And they both died of natural causes within a short period of each other.
What office did Henry Clay?
He's Speaker of the House. Speaker of the House is now dead, the President's dead, the new Vice President, a man who's completely unimportant, Millard Fillmore, except that Millard Fillmore decided to clear the vote completely by appointing Daniel Webster Secretary of State. So now we've got a new President, a new Speaker of the House, and a brand new leader of the Senate. And they're able to cooperate. You know, as you might expect, when you enter a position, you don't have as many enemies as you'll have later. I hope you guys realize that although we had a major election with Americans, nothing changed in the Congress at all, except the previous leader of the Republicans is now the Speaker of the House, and the previous Speaker of the House is now the leader of the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi and Orange Face. What's his name again? Huh? Bonner. We'll not call him Boner. Bonner, guy with a funny face, and his face is permanently orange because of 20 or 30 years of tanning machines. His face is orange. His entire body is orange. He is our first colored Speaker of the House. Nothing's changed. These people don't like each other. You expect they're going to cooperate now that they've changed offices? Nancy Pelosi is now going to be the make sure that everything fails person, I think. Whereas Bonner was the make sure everything fails person before. Wonderful. Okay, and so a compromise is now available to be worked out. And what they decided to do was not put the compromise together as one great big omnibus bill, but space it out in little pieces and have the Congress pass lots of little things, and when it was all done, hopefully there'd be enough things passed that would be favorable to the free states of the North that congressmen who voted for it could say, look, I got you these things. Don't worry about those things that benefit the South. Look, we got these things. And then Southerners, congressmen could say, look, I got these things for you guys. Now, I know the North also gained some things as well, but let's just concentrate on these things that I got for us. Congressmen always have to go back to their districts and their states and explain how their votes benefited you. Not all Americans, but just you guys here. You know, I vote something that benefits America, but hurts Texas, I don't get reelected. Okay. And so that's very important and always has been. Okay. So now the pieces. First, let's talk about the law, some of the laws that benefited the North. Number one, and most importantly, California was admitted to the Union as a free state. That's very big. That's a big win for the free states to now get 2 more senators. But if you happen to be from Ohio or New York or Pennsylvania, California is pretty damn far away from you. And the fact that California's been admitted to the free state is not going to be enough to satisfy Yankee voters, because they know that Southerners got some things that benefited them and helped the slave system. So the Northerners wanted something more. And what they got was a federal law outlawing the owning of slaves in the District of Columbia. Washington, D.C. had always been slave territory. Virginia, where slavery is legal, is below the District of Columbia, and Maryland, where slavery was legal, was above it. Washington, D.C. traditionally is a southern city, although that's not quite as true anymore. What accent do people speak in Washington, D.C.? A majority of people in Washington, D.C. are African American, so they speak with an African American accent. Does an African American accent exist? There is no such thing. If you're talking to a woman on a phone, can you tell if she's a white woman or a black woman? Yes, you can. Accents are just accents. Okay. Not only that, but I think that black men have one accent and black women have another accent. Why are you talking? I don't know if it's that way. And that the Southern accent is beginning to fade away among white Southerners. It's losing its vitality. It used to be much stronger than it is today.
Not the rural areas.
I know.
Yeah, I go to the rural areas. I know, but I never go to the rural areas. It's still there, strong as ever. I'm absolutely certain of that, yes. Yes. Okay. So slavery abolished in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. had been the largest slave market in America. And by 1850, European countries had banned slavery long ago. And so it was humiliating for congressmen whose offices were in Washington, D.C., from free states to look out their window at the National Mall, which didn't have a pond anymore. That was the slave market, with the Washington Monument rising up in the center. Okay. And so now that embarrassment has been eliminated. It's now against the law to own a slave in Washington, D.C. Okay. Now, meanwhile, they decided to go ahead and split the middle and open up Utah and New Mexico territory for slavery through popular sovereignty. See? Compromise 1850 allowed votes in Utah and New Mexico to decide whether to permit slavery as a salve, as a gift to the Southern congressmen. The Southerners could now, those congressmen could now go down to the South and see, look, we've now opened up more territory, potentially, for future slave states someday when anyone moves there. In 1850, the Mormons hadn't even made it to Utah yet. They were still being murdered across America on their way to Utah, but haven't gotten anywhere near that far yet. It's difficult to migrate across the country while people are shooting you dead the whole time. And of course, you better believe, shot back. Throughout Mormon history, there were Mormon massacres, and then there were Mormon massacres. By which I mean, if you massacred the Mormons, they massacred back. Okay, Old Testament says do it. You better believe Mormons are, what Mormons? Mormons are Christians who believe every word in the Old Testament is legit as well. Plus their other book, which we won't talk about. Okay, the Book of Mormon, yes. That little red book they give you that's free with the Bible when they mail it to you. The Bible, don't read that one. Well, read it, what do I care? And New Mexico and Arizona, they didn't become states until 1912. So there's no Americans. This desert and mountains, it's empty. There is no one. This is not much of an advantage for the South. If this is all Southern congressmen can tell their voters that they got for the slavery system is useless Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, that's not going to be enough. They're going to need something more as well. And in this case, what we're going to learn about this law is that sometimes, what do they say? The old Asians say, whom the gods wish to destroy, first they grant their wishes. Because if most of us got what we really wanted, it would destroy us and pretty quick. Okay? And so be careful what you want in life. You might get it. It's a lesson. Because what the Southerners thought they wanted was an improved fugitive slave law. They wanted the fugitive slave law given some teeth, some enforcement power. And so this is called the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, to separate from the fact that there had always been a fugitive slave law in effect since our nation began. The Southern congressmen had demanded that the government pass a law stating that if a slave ran away to a free state, they were still a slave. It was just that up north, it was universally ignored. That it would have been impossible to convince a jury of Yankees to order a black person back into the South, into slavery, even if there were evidence that that person were a slave. They weren't going to do it. Okay. And that irritated Southerners to no end. Okay. Y'all are harboring our property. How can we stay in a country where people are stealing and harboring our property? The improved fugitive slave law of 1850 gave Southerners the right to become bounty hunters, is the phrase I was looking for. So now I don't have to go back to my lecture notes. Southerners could now deputize themselves, go up north as bounty hunters, and round up black people and accuse them of being runaway slaves. Then the trial would not be in civil court with jurors. It would be federal judges who would all be Southerners themselves, and would be, just like the Vice Admiralty courts, paid more money if they ruled the black person was a slave than they would be paid for their service if the judges ruled that the slaves were free, that the black people were free. Okay. Guaranteeing that the cases would always be ruled against the black person. Okay. And as a result, hundreds of big, burly, angry, violent white Southerners began traveling across the South like they were traveling across the North like they were Earth's dictators, rounding up black folks. Now, you might be prejudiced up north. You might think that white people are superior to black people. But have you known that black person in your community his entire life? Neighbor, you know this person. You know their family. Okay? You talk with them. You buy and sell with them. Are you going to be happy when this other guy comes and just grabs that person and takes them away? Not at all. And this is going to be the first time you've met a Southern person. You and I are trying to say the improved fugitive slave law gave the Southerners a really bad reputation in the North. Northerners began seeing Southerners as angry, violent bounty hunters who think the law is in their hands the whole time. Okay. So this is going to increase the bad feelings between the North and the South. Yankees who don't like Southerners, don't like their culture, and don't like the way they push people around. Okay, so really that didn't benefit them. Maybe the Civil War wouldn't have been fought if the North and South hadn't come to hate each other so much because of laws like this. And in fact, the very next action, the very next thing we talk about is directly related to the fugitive slave law in a way you might not think. And also points out that just because women couldn't vote yet doesn't mean they didn't have a role to play in American history. Because this novel right here, Uncle Tom's Cabin, is another social cause of the Civil War, a cause of why Northerners and Southerners came to be such enemies of each other, and were more than willing to fight a war against each other within their own country. Because Uncle Tom's Cabin affected people's opinions and caused many people to oppose slavery and become sympathetic to the plight of black people in America who might not have realized it quite yet before they read the novel. Written by Harriet Beecher Stowe in 1852, a woman from New England, where black people have lived for hundreds of years. People have been living in Boston since before the Revolution. Many of you think that black people just arrived up north recently. People have been living in all parts of the United States for hundreds of years. She was inspired by the sight of one of these runaway slaves who'd been caught by Southern bounty hunters. The Boston citizens rallied to the support of the black person and attacked the bounty hunters, and the bounty hunters had to get a regiment of American Army soldiers by court order so they could get this guy onto a ship in Boston and send him back to the South so he could become a slave again. And she was so angry by that she decided she'd do something about it. She'd write a novel, she'd write a book. It was the first book ever in which the good guys, the protagonists, are black people. They're slaves. The good guys are black slaves. They're human. They are presented as human beings who have normal desires and want to live free. And the white Southerners, they're the antagonists. They're the bad guys. They're the ones who do terrible things. Now, this is a 19th century novel. It's what we would call today a melodrama. If any of you knew, except for Charles, me, and the nice lady. What's your name again?
Sandra.
Sandra. Us three know what a melodrama is. Who else knows? Anyone else except us three? What's a melodrama? I told you they didn't know. How about if I ask you what makes a soap opera different from other shows? How are soap operas different from other TV shows?
Dramatic.
That's correct. That's what a melodrama is. An overly, excessively dramatic presentation. I shall now come and take you away. You know, like Snidely with melodrama, very melodramatic. You only see that today in soap operas because they got to write a script 5 days a week, 365 days a year. The actors have got 15 minutes to read their lines before they're on camera. Everybody just overacts. Line, oh, Henry, oh. Okay, you know, because it's to keep it exciting. Science fictions are often melodramatic as well. We're just poorly acted. Okay, one or the other. All right, and so not many people read that book anymore, but it had millions of Americans bought copies. And even though millions of other Americans were illiterate, the book caught fire and it was serialized into local theater productions all across America. Put that play on, by which I mean the North. Because, for God's sakes, as we're going to find out, in many parts of the South, if you were caught with a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin, you would be put on trial and convicted and executed. Okay, you better believe it. That by the late 1850s, the South was not in a mood for freedom of speech, and people caught with abolitionist literature were treated very harshly indeed. And this would be the most famous piece of abolitionist literature in American history. There, Uncle Tom's Cabin, the most famous piece of abolitionist literature in American history. Okay, good. Are you keeping up with me with the dictionary?
Yes.
Good job. It's all in there. It's all in there, you better believe it. Okay. Why, you can even trust Wikipedia with history. Nobody lies about stuff that happened centuries ago because nobody cares enough to get on the internet and waste their night lying about the Hellenistic era. So everything in there is actually trustworthy. The only thing you're going to find in Wikipedia's lies are things about today. It's full of lies about the present because people are always going in there and messing with it. You see the comic strip today? Pearls before swine, Rat says, I've got it in Wikipedia, I'm going to change, and says that you can reduce global warming by jumping out of your window by going yuck, 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 like a Three Stooges. So why are you doing that? Just for fun. No one would ever, and then pig goes flying out the window. Yuck, 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 splat. You shouldn't be on the internet so much. Oh well. The way his
It's on the
internet.
internet, so it must be true.
Yeah, that's right. And to say about comic strips, they're one of the 3 or 4 ways to judge whether somebody's intelligent or not. Dumb people never read comic strips. Why? They don't get the jokes. That's right. Okay. There. So we see a series of events now which are turning people sour in the North against Southerners. And you don't have to do anything except slightly criticize a Southerner, like, I don't really like the idea of slavery. You've just made an enemy with a Southerner. So Southerners and Yankees are now increasingly coming to seriously dislike each other as people, and cultures, and societies, and wanting less and less to do with each other. You've got to hate somebody before you start shooting at them, especially if those people are citizens of your own country. A civil war is very different from the war between 2 countries. Very different. Is there anyone in this room been in a country experiencing civil war in their life? Not this time, but it's happened before. It is not very pleasant. Okay, not very pleasant at all. Brother against brother, town against town. All right, the next topic is the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which led to the destruction of the Whig Party. The Whig Party only existed for about 20 years because in 1854 it experienced a premature death as a result of another effort at compromise concerning the extension of slavery out west, which went bad. And instead of making people feel better at the end of this compromise made people feel worse and angrier. The failed Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which would lead to the destruction of the Whig Party. The Whig Party being basically the only political organization left in America trying to keep the country together. Specifically, what made a Whig was a belief that holding the country together is more important than anything else, including disagreements over slavery. That's what would make a Southerner vote Whig. A Southerner who believed that preserving the Union was more important than slavery would vote Whig. Although the Whigs would never have talked about banning slavery because that would damage America. Okay, so we would probably say things like, can we just have a year without arguing over slavery? Okay, is what they would probably have said. Okay, and my little map here has Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 allowed voters in Kansas and Nebraska to decide whether to permit slavery. That is popular sovereignty. That what the Compromise of 1854 did is open up the entire remaining frontier to slavery. Compromise of 1850, it made it possible for New Mexico and Utah to maybe become slave states if the people who settled there voted to. And now Kansas and Nebraska would be open to slavery as well. I now want you to notice it's possible for slave states to be on the Canadian border, which would cut the free states off from the frontier and cause them to be encircled by slave states. That's the way Northerners would present it. This is a huge danger. There'll be no free soil left in the West for people to settle and start farms who don't want to have to compete with slave labor. Reminding you again that there were many races in the North who did not believe in the equality of the races, who were very opposed to slavery, not because they sympathized with black people, because they were afraid of the uncontrolled economic power of plantation owners. If I own 1,000 slaves, how much do I have to pay them an hour? Nothing. How can a free man in a free environment compete with that? I've got to pay my labor a wage because I'm hiring free men. If this guy shows up and sets up a factory next to mine and uses slaves, I'll be driven out of business. That is an economic reason to oppose slavery. Plus, there were abolitionists who were now beginning to oppose slavery for moral and ethical grounds, like Harriet Beecher Stowe. Yes?
Which way did they vote in Nebraska and Kansas? Did they vote?
They haven't got there yet. And obviously, we're going to spend a bleeding Kansas will take me 10 or 15 minutes to talk about the bloodshed, murder, and chaos that occurs in Kansas when democracy fails completely and totally to solve the problem. If you have two groups of people in a country, and 51% of them strongly believe in one thing, and say they're all Muslims, and 49% are all Christians, and you have an election, and one side wins 50.5% of the votes, and the other side loses with 49.9%, that's going to solve every problem, isn't it? They're all going to live in peace after that, aren't they? They're going to get guns and start shooting each other the day after the election is over. Every single time. And of course, that's never happened in America. It has happened in America as well. Of course it has. I'm sorry, but if you have two people with diametrically opposed ideas, democracy just makes them angrier at each other. Better have a monarchy in such a situation, where the king allows everyone religious freedom. Monarchies can be very effective governments, as long as the king's not an idiot. As a matter of fact, the best government in the world is a monarchy with a good king. What's the worst government in the world? A monarchy with a bad king. What's a democracy? In the middle. In the middle. You can't guarantee good government, a good king, can you? Eventually, all monarchies end up with a bad king, and then the next thing you know, you have no monarchy. Yeah, like George III, our bad king, who we got rid of. Yes. Okay. Excellent. So now let's cover it in a little bit more detail. The causes. I've now told you what the Nebraska Act was. Now I'm going to give you the cause of why it was passed in the first place. And the cause is the new Speaker of the House, the Democratic Congressman, Stephen Douglas. The same man who will have the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates over slavery. Stephen Douglas was a powerful man, the second most powerful man in America, the Speaker of the House, who replaced Henry Clay. He's a Democrat. And as a Democrat, he supports expansionist, manifest destiny ideas. Now, we already have all the territory out to California, but how to get people to settle there? By building a railroad. Railroads are built to link cities with each other. City A is linked to City B. That way people can travel on the railroad back and forth between both cities. Do you guys understand? You never build a railroad from City A to the middle of nowhere and then stop and wait for a city to be built, because you wouldn't make much money, would you, at all? So the railroads are not going to build railroads out west where nobody lives yet until people move there. And nobody's going to move there until the railroads are built, because people in America start businesses to make money. I hope you know that no one has ever started a farm in America to feed their family. American farmers have always seen themselves as what? Well, as a matter of fact, there's a word we usually put in front of that. What type of businessmen? Well, I'm thinking small businessmen. They see themselves as small businessmen. Maybe I don't make a lot of money, but I am in it for a business, aren't I? And maybe I'll make enough money someday so my children don't have to be damn farmers with dirt under their fingernails their whole lives. Generally, there's very few farmers who have anything good to say about farming, except that it sucks and it's really hard work, and you don't make much money. Okay, and you can't count on anything. Mother Nature comes around and destroys you every couple of years, doesn't she? Yeah. Okay. So, Stephen Douglas proposed, he wanted the government to finance the building of a railroad from the east to the west, a transcontinental railroad, which in fact wouldn't be built for over 20 years. But they're talking about it already. Now, as a congressman from Illinois, Stephen Douglas wants this railroad to run from Illinois across the northern half of the West and end up in Sacramento or San Francisco, helping Northerners settle the West. Now, Southern congressmen said, this is a great idea, building a transcontinental railroad. We'll start it in New Orleans, run it across Texas to Los Angeles. Great idea. We'll vote for that. Oops, that'll only benefit the South. There you go. Now we're arguing over the route of the railroad. Should it help the North or the South? So Stephen Douglas has to play politics. If he wants that route to go across the North, he's going to have to give the South something else in return. And what he offers them is a bombshell that almost blows the country to pieces. Well, we're getting so many bombs hitting us now that after a while the ship's going to sink and the war is going to start. The ship of peace is being hit by so many shells now it's going to sink. And this is a serious shell. Because what Stephen Douglas offers the South is popular sovereignty for Kansas and Nebraska. You let me build a railroad across the North, and when Kansas has enough people to live in it, we'll open Kansas up for popular sovereignty, and then you can tell your voters that there's a possibility of more slave states in the future. More slave states in the future. Okay, excellent. And so the South votes for it. Well, Democrats do, but the Whigs are put in an impossible position. The Southern Whigs vote for it and demand the right that Kansas become a slave state. Northern Whigs, this is an abomination. They absolutely positively will not vote for something that might cause slave states to reach all the way to the Canadian border. They absolutely oppose it. You can't stay. They can't be members of the same party if they are diametrically opposed to the most important issue of the day. Just like here in Texas, we do not have pro-lifers and pro-choicers together in either party. The people on either side of that are so serious about their belief that they will not allow anyone with an opposing view in their party. These are one of the issues that is constantly pushing the Republican Party to become more and more conservative, and the Democratic Party to become more and more liberal, until large numbers of people like you and me feel in their hearts that we have no party that we even want to belong with. And I want a curse upon both their houses. I have nothing good to say about either political party anymore. They're both run by extremists, while I'm a moderate. Okay. Now, we've had moderates. John Kennedy was a moderate president. We've had moderate presidents in the past. Eisenhower was a moderate president. I'm going to say Bill Clinton was a moderate president. As a matter of fact, now enough time has gone by, I think we can prove that, can't we? Considering the presidents that followed him before, he was a moderate president. Yeah. Okay. In fact, most of our greatest successes in our country happen when we have moderate presidents. I can't even mention a politician who I think is a moderate. Maybe the governor of Louisiana. That guy I seem to like. I see him as a moderate.
Because they hate the federal government in Louisiana.
Huh?
Because they hate the federal government in Louisiana.
They do hate the federal government in Louisiana and Texas and Oklahoma.
More so
Yes.
in Louisiana, though, because after Katrina, they felt completely betrayed.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's...
You can get away with so much in Louisiana, it's ridiculous.
That's true as well. We don't have time to talk about Louisiana. I give my Louisiana lecture during my Depression speech when I mentioned Huey Long. That it all dovetails together. That's the best time to do that. Okay. Okay, that's it. And so the Whig Party ceased to exist. It disintegrated. The congressmen who were Whigs were now independents. The party ceases to exist. Political parties can die. Just because we haven't had one die in 150 years now, well, we're really due for one. Because they're both really old and crickety. We need to get rid of one of them, and it ain't the Democrats because they're never going anywhere. You might, there's now a 50% chance that Tea Party is actually the beginning of the disintegration of the Republican Party. That the far right Tea Partiers just won't. Never mind. Enough of that. We'll just see what happens. So that leads us to Bleeding Kansas. Okay, yeah, Bleeding Kansas.
Yeah,
That's moving along today. Kansas, now by 1855, Kansas has enough people living in it to become a state. Although you need to know that everyone's living right along the east side over here, and nobody has settled the mountains yet at all. Okay, so everybody's living over here. But by this time, there's enough people in Kansas. And obviously, we can figure out that something goes wrong in Kansas because the newspapers call it Bleeding Kansas. That's what the newspapers call it. You know, like whenever something happens, and cable news always has to give it a Operation Doofus Land. Bum 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 bum. Then they have a little music for it, so you know that this special report is about that thing you've been watching the news, so the ratings can go up. We haven't had one of those in a long time. I'm sure that the cable news networks are desperate for a crisis. Okay. I remember after we invaded Iraq, MSNBC tried to rile up a war with Syria. They spent 3 days talking about how we were going to attack Syria, until I almost believed it, until I turned the channel and found out the other networks weren't talking about that at all. That MSNBC was trying to make up. I mean, from that's when I lost all respect for that pathetic little effort. Very embarrassing indeed, trying to make a war just because their ratings
Their ratings, MSNBC covered the Iraqi invasion very well, and their ratings went very high. So they wanted more invasions. Okay, so that was the storyline, Bleeding Kansas. We're going to let democracy solve this problem of the extension of slavery, and because democracy always works, everything's going to be lovely. No. No. Because elections can be stolen so many different ways. And in this case, the election was stolen by the border ruffians of Missouri. We'll get to that later. The border ruffians of Missouri who stole the election of 1855 in Kansas. You see, slavery was really an economic institution. No one owned slaves anywhere in America where you couldn't make good money off of them. If you couldn't make good money off of them, it had been banned. Remember, it was cotton that gave slavery its revival in the South, and you don't and can't grow cotton in Kansas. Cotton is wheat country, isn't it? Okay? You can own a relatively large wheat field, you can harvest it yourself with your family labor, you don't need slaves. Nobody owned any slaves in Kansas. But for reasons of regional honor, the South desperately wants to get another slave state. So on the day of the election, thousands and thousands of men who were actually citizens of Missouri illegally crossed the border with their horses and their guns, rode into the towns of Kansas, and at gunpoint demanded the right to vote as Kansas citizens, to throw the election to pro-slave. There weren't that many people living in Kansas yet, and so many of these border ruffians, that's the word for it, that the newspapers use. All these people from Missouri crossed over, thwarted the election, and when the votes were actually counted, so many Missourians had voted pro-slave that Kansas had voted pro-slave. This breaks every concept of federalism in America. You can only vote in the state you live in. Let's say you wanted Obama to be president in 2008. Was Obama going to win Texas?
No.
So wasn't your vote kind of wasted if you voted for Obama in Texas because everyone knew McCain was going to win in Texas?
Yes.
But didn't Obama desperately have to win Ohio and Florida? So why not drive to Florida and vote there? Why not?
Because you have to be.
Because you can't. You can only vote where you live. This is a federal system with 50 sovereign states, with separate laws in each of the states. Not a single country. We're 50 countries that are a single country, not 50 provinces of a single country. It's confusing. It's confusing. 50 sovereign states, part of a sovereign country. You know, as I said before, no other country on earth is like that, but we are that way, on purpose. And this is what happens when it's messed up. The election has had an unusual result, and the pro-slave forces are now in charge of the government of Kansas, and make as their capital the southernmost city in Kansas, Lecompton, becomes the capital of the pro-slave forces in Kansas, who know that they are outnumbered 10-1 by the real people who live in Kansas, that this is a false government. And so they push through extremely pro-slave laws to try to clamp down and create security in the state for the pro-slavery forces. This was the first southern state to make it the death penalty for owning abolitionist literature. Everywhere else in the country, if you were an elected official, you swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States. In Kansas, if you were an elected official like a sheriff, you swore an oath to the slavery system. Not only were there lots of people in Kansas who did not like this, but there were soon many more people in Kansas who did not like this. Because the abolitionists had decided it was time to get tough themselves. Yes, they believe it is their Christian duty to oppose slavery, but not peacefully necessarily anymore. There are people who now believe that it may be necessary to use violence and lay down people's lives to end slavery, to use what might be called freedom fighters or terrorism, according to what side you're on, as a policy tool to put slavery down. Men like what? Who's the name we're looking for here? The most famous of all these people. the violent abolitionists. John Brown. John Brown, who will show up later as well. John Brown and many other abolitionists were now getting serious. They began doing things like paying for Yankees to settle in Kansas, so large numbers of Yankees would settle there so they could win the next election and ban slavery. Now, once again, in the rural areas of Texas and Oklahoma, what accent, Southern or Yankee? Now let's go just across that straight line border into Kansas. What accent do people out in the countryside and anywhere in Kansas speak with? A Yankee accent. Any of you ever watched Wizard of Oz? Okay, anyone in that family speaking with a Southern accent? There's just one guy, probably from the South. Drunk guy. Yeah. They're Yankees. Why are people from Kansas speaking with a Yankee accent? Because their ancestors came from New England. It was abolitionists moving to Kansas, started a new life, and bring an end to slavery. John Brown didn't stop there. He rode into Kansas with a band of several dozen armed men. He began riding south into towns like Lecompton and attacking them. Property was destroyed. People were wounded. People were killed. And the pro-slave forces were angry at that and retaliated and rode back with posses up north into the northern parts of Kansas that were anti-slave and shot up anti-slave towns. And both sides were killing and wounding each other. As the newspapers called it, Bleeding Kansas. Let's say what it was. The Civil War broke out in miniature in Kansas in 1856 first. And people never stopped killing each other in Kansas over slavery until the Civil War broke out in the rest of the country in 1860. Just like you can say that World War II broke out first in the Spanish Civil War, years before it broke out in the rest of Europe, with communists and fascists fighting it out in Spain first, before the whole world exploded in that conflict. See, I told you I knew my European history. To finish the story of Bleeding Kansas, first of all, where is the President of the United States? Well, I'll tell you where. Loserville. Because from this point on, we get a string of useless, incompetent, do-nothing presidents who diddle and twiddle their thumbs while the country is collapsing. Here's a lesson to tell you. If you have bad leader after bad leader elected in a democracy, it is not good for a democracy. You get enough bad leaders in a row, it destroys your country. And let's think about it. First of all, let's go 1848, we get Zachary Taylor elected president, dies of natural causes. That's a failure. Millard Fillmore, a total loser. In 1852, we get a guy elected president named Franklin Pierce, a total nobody. Why does Franklin Pierce get elected in 1852? Why does James Buchanan get elected in 1856? This is the entirety of my lecture on the elections of 1852 and 1856. I'm giving it now. They're not that important, so I'm just going to use them as part of my discussion over the country drifting towards slavery, over the questions, drifting towards a civil war, over disagreements over slavery. Because by 1852, there was only one type of man who could be elected president. By 1852, if you were a Southern plantation slave owner, you could no longer get elected president. Yankees would not vote for such a man. No longer. No, they wouldn't. Yankees would not vote for people who they might think were excessively racist. There are no founding fathers left alive in the South. Southern gentlemen aren't going to get elected president ever again. Neither would any Yankee who'd ever criticized slavery in the slightest way. Right? If you were a Yankee with the slightest bit of abolitionism in you, no Southerner would ever vote for you. That leaves only one person, a Yankee who's soft on slavery. Yankees would vote for a Yankee regardless of his position on slavery. And Southerners would vote for a Yankee if he said he would not do a single thing to damage the slavery system. So we have do-nothing presidents who get elected by promising not to do anything about slavery, period. I won't say anything about it, I'll just ignore it. And as we all know, if you ignore a problem long enough, it just goes away by itself. No, it doesn't. And so Franklin Pierce couldn't do anything. He promised not to do anything, so he didn't do anything. Then James Buchanan was elected president in 1856. He promised not to talk about slavery, so he didn't talk about it. The country continued to disintegrate around him. Two of the two worst presidents we ever had, because the country was disintegrating, and they almost, arrogantly and mean-spiritedly refused to take even the slightest action that might save the country. Not going to lift a finger.
They didn't send the army in, they didn't.
They did, yeah, that's right. They could have done anything. Something. Give a speech, send the army in, something, anything. Restore order. The president of a country. The country's falling apart, but they didn't do anything. And that's just because of the situation that we were in. A very bad situation indeed. Okay. Great. So now we've got, we're reaching, good, we're doing so well today. Yeah, that if I can make it to the John Brown's rate, that's where I want to stop. And good, I'll be able to do the student evaluation of the teacher, yes. So we're going to get there in just a moment. Okay. Then there's, okay, so it was bad enough that violence was now going on in Kansas concerning slavery, and people were killing each other over the question of the extension of slavery. But then violence occurred within our own Congress House itself. I think you could all agree, if you were watching C-SPAN and one congressman was giving a speech against Republicans, and a Republican pulled out a machine gun and gunned him down while he was speaking, that you would feel that your country was in a bad place. And that's almost exactly what happened, what has to do with these men, Charles Sumner and Preston Brooks, and Charles Sumner's Crimes Against Kansas speech. Charles Sumner's Crimes Against Kansas speech involves some names. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat them, because everyone always asks me to repeat them over and over again. Sadly enough, as if this is the most important thing that ever happened in American history. It's not one of the most important things. It just involves 3 people. So you'll have to memorize 3 names. If you think that's hard, take a really difficult class instead. You know, there you go. This is not difficult, but here we go. All right. All right. So in many ways, what we're talking about now is the national reaction to what's going on in Kansas. The national reaction to what's going on in Kansas. Charles Sumner was a senator. There is a difference between being a senator and a House of Representatives congressman, because senators are more important in reality and in their own minds. They see themselves as miniature presidents. If you haven't noticed, senators walk around as if they were little presidents of the United States. There's only 2 for every state, and they serve 6-year terms. So they don't really have to worry about the voters. But in the House of Representatives, you only serve 2 terms, and then you're just one of 435. So you're much less important as an individual. And the Senate is called the Senate for that reason. It is the more aristocratic of our governing institutions. There was so much democracy in the House of Representatives, it scared the Founding Fathers, and they decided to make sure the Senate didn't have as much democracy, like the Roman Senate it's named after. So there are special rules of the Senate. For example, no senator is ever allowed in the Senate chambers during a speech to criticize or insult another senator for any reason. You can criticize their policy positions, but not them. Dishonoring them, criticizing their character. You can't attack another person. If you do, you'll be censored. You'll be ostracized. And there have been cases where senators have been ostracized, by which I mean, from that point on, whenever you give a speech, everyone else in the Senate chamber walks out on you. Okay, because you haven't followed the rules. It's like a fraternity or a secret order that way. You're in the Senate of the United States, as it were, for God's sakes, act like it. All right? But Charles Sumner broke this rule, this written rule. It's not unwritten, it's a written rule. He was giving a speech called Crimes Against Kansas. And he's blaming the South for the deaths in Kansas. And he specifically blames by name a particular Southern congressman, not Preston Brooks, but a much older man named Andrew Butler. Andrew Butler and Charles Sumner are both nearly 70 years old. And Charles Sumner has now personally insulted Andrew Butler by name in his speech. And if you go by the code of honor, you know that he now must do something to restore his family name. You may also know in a duel that if you were too weak or old to duel yourself, was it okay to have someone else duel in your name, called a second? It was perfectly honorable. And so Andrew Butler went to his younger nephew, who was a member of the House on the other side of the Capitol building. The Senate meets on one side, the House meets on the other, and there's that great big rotunda in the center. Okay. They're in the same building, but they don't like each other. Okay, they never really have. Preston Brooks is a congressman. He takes it on as his family honor to punish Charles Sumner for the insult. On the next day, while the Senate proceedings are happening, Preston Brooks walks in, calmly pulls out a great big cane with a great big metal handle, and beats Charles Sumner half to death on the Senate floor. There's blood lying everywhere. He remained an invalid for the rest of his life, never fully recovering. So now congressmen are beating each other half to death in the U.S. Congress over questions over slavery. That is another sign that we are on the edge
Wait,
of a
so
civil war.
Who did the beating?
Who did the beating?
Was it Andrew Butler's nephew?
Andrew Butler's nephew, Preston Brooks. And where's he from? Who is he, Yankee or Southerner?
Southerner.
That's right. So the Southerner beat the Yankee for insulting the Southerner's position. Get that right or you get it wrong. Okay, obviously. And of course, like you might think, it's the consequences. It's what happened afterwards that matters the most. Because in the North, Charles Sumner is now a hero, a martyr for the cause of abolitionists and free the slaves. Whereas in the South, Preston Brooks is the hero, standing up for Southerners' rights and honor. When Preston Brooks went back to his hometown of Charleston, he was met with a ticker-tape parade, and they gave him a brand new cane because he'd broken the old one and he hit him so hard, and embossed on the cane were the words, "Hit him again." Okay, really? Once the Civil War breaks out, I don't think there'll be a problem with volunteers getting guns and shooting each other.
That's messed up.
Okay, we're pretty close. We're getting so close that all we need is a few other screw-ups, and then there's going to be a war. And so let's cover the last couple of screw-ups and the things that totally lead to the two sides totally lacking any trust or confidence in each other. And that the straw is getting drier and drier and drier, so that now the slightest spark and the whole thing's going to go up. And the Dred Scott case, and especially the John Brown's raid. John Brown's raid is not a spark, it's a gallon of gasoline tossed on top. Okay. So the last of the sparks is the Dred Scott case. And let's cover the Dred Scott case. And once again, it's a law case. And all law cases can be as complicated as you want to make them. They've all got twists and turns that can take a very long time to cover. So I'm going to try my very best to spend only 3 or 4 minutes. Okay, giving you the most important stuff of the Dred Scott case of 1857. First of all, who's Dred Scott?
He's a slave.
He's a slave. Okay, very good. Dred Scott. It's called Dred Scott case because it's a case concerning lawsuits to try to gain a slave's freedom. Okay, very good. Because Dred Scott, when you want to win a symbolic case, you want to make sure that everything's on your side. You know, somebody might be doing something wrong to you, and you want the ACLU to side with you in the case, but they find out that you had a child out of wedlock a few years ago, so they won't represent you. Because now the opposition attorney will use that to try to make the jury think that you're a bad woman. Does that have anything to do with the case at all? No. Do lawyers do that all the time? Go after your reputation to make you look bad?
Yes.
That's what they're paid for. Okay. All right. So abolitionists picked this case because they felt that Dred Scott had an extremely strong argument in favor. Okay. Very strong argument in favor. So let's explain how that happened, because many things happen. Dred Scott's master only owns one slave, Dred Scott, so Dred Scott's his servant. Dred Scott's master is a traveling salesman from the South who spends almost his entire time up north and isn't really a very dedicated master. He tends to leave Dred Scott alone for months or years at a time. He left Dred Scott alone in the free state of Wisconsin for years, showing no interest in picking him back up or really wanting him. And so abolitionists sued in federal court to give Dred Scott his freedom. But before the case came up, The South found out about it and put massive pressure on Dred Scott's master until Dred Scott's master went back up to Wisconsin and picked him up. Okay. Next, Dred Scott's master's in New York City, where he dies of natural causes. He has no living relatives. Dred Scott is now a slave with no owner, with no one who could claim him, in a free state where you can't own slaves. That's a very strong case. I want to be free, no one owns me, I just want to be declared a free man in New York City. Southerners made sure the lawyers had enough money to sue all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is only as impressive as the 9 human beings who sit on the board. And if the 9 human beings are racist, you're going to get racist rulings. They may interpret the law any way they want. And as a result, we need to mention the name of the Supreme Court Justice so we can blame him for the Dred Scott case. Roger Taney, not Tranny. I don't want to see that in any essays, ha-ha. Taney, T-A-N-N-Y. From Maryland, slave state, appointed by Andrew Jackson. He was the Chief Justice from 1836 to 1864. He's as racist as they get. The case was a very short case. There was no ruling. The Dred Scott sat down there. Taney noticed what color Dred Scott was, and he asked his lawyers, "Is this person here a slave?" And they say, "Yes, he was a slave." He says, "Well, case dismissed. We only hear cases of human beings. A dog, a cat, a table, a chair. They can't have a court case, and neither can a slave. They're not citizens. They're not even human beings. They're animals. They're possessions. So, no case." All right. As a result, there is a multiple choice question in your quiz of 25 questions, which I always get wrong on purpose because I disagree with the answer. Okay? You may make any decision you want on what the meaning of the... Do people disagree over the meaning of rulings in court cases? So a guy makes a ruling and immediately 6 people give 6 different opinions of what they think it means. This is what's wrong with letting someone else write a history professor's history questions. Okay, so I disagree with the answer chosen and still have never gotten better than a 23 on that quiz myself. I'm your teacher, I'll get a 23 out of 25. So if you want to do better than that, you really know how to kiss up to somebody, because I didn't teach it to you that way. I'm teaching you the exact same opinion that Abraham Lincoln had, and that many Yankees had. The Dred Scott case had just clearly ruled that you could own slaves under any reason, any circumstances, anywhere in the United States, which is the wrong answer on the quiz that somebody else wrote, whoever the hell that person is.
What's the answer on the quiz?
What do I care? I don't remember. I only remember what I teach, and what Abraham Lincoln said, and what Yankees said. Southerners would have said something different, wouldn't they? And I suppose the person who wrote the test is a Southerner, and Southerners to this very day can't help it if they're white. They tend to be apologists for slavery in the South and try to explain it away without making all of their ancestors quite as evil as you might. Because they've got people, do I have any ancestors who ever owned slaves? I'm Irish Italian. You know how poor my Irish ancestors when they showed up? Now, on the other hand, I had some ancestors who joined that riot in New York City because they didn't want to be drafted in no war to free some damn slaves, and they didn't give a damn care about it all. Do you think poor Irish coming out of the boat cared about slaves? They felt they were being treated worse, and they did not want to serve. Were they racist? You better believe they were racist. Deeply racist. But there you go. That's just the way things work. So the Dred Scott case is the perfect place to stop. Yeah. It just made things worse. Even the Supreme Court could not solve the issue of the extension of slavery. Every time we tried to use one of our institutions to avoid the war, it just made the war more likely. And so did the Dred Scott case, because you better believe that made Yankees feel that slavery was winning every battle. And at some point, the anti-slave free staters had to start standing up for themselves. Very good. That's a place to stop right there. That's an excellent place to stop. He's going to pass it out. You can start while I get out of here. I'm just going to walk out, pretend I've already left, and y'all have a good week. We'll see you on Tuesday, and of course, no class on Thursday. That's Thanksgiving. Did you take it late? Okay, then it's not this